So this is, I think, the fourth offering on working with relationship and the kind of challenges that relationship offers us. And I know Jeff gave a talk several weeks ago now, and he and Heather had noted in the feedback to the talk about the acronym RAIN in terms of working with some of these difficulties. So I wanted to walk you through that we've done it before, but I wanted to walk you through it in a way that has more opportunity to ask questions and clarify some things than what we ordinarily do. As a way of helping us develop a particular practice and a way of practicing with difficulties. And the difficulties can be, just our own internal relationship with ourselves, if you will, maybe with our critical mind or with our own emotions. They might be difficulties in relationship, in personal relationship. They might be challenges at work. They might be challenges with family members. And they might be actually more systemic kinds of difficulties. The news these days certainly presents me, and perhaps you, with some challenges about how do I be present with this, and how do I bring my spiritual practice to bear with my greed, hatred, and delusion around some of these challenges. So hopefully the guided meditation will give you a bit of a tool and a way of thinking about it a little bit more deeply. And simply, the Buddha invites us to cultivate a new relationship with our experience, with life, with its difficulties and challenges. Ordinarily, what we try to do in our ordinary human minds is to fix things, to intervene, to be wise, to be skillful, to do something, to vote, if it's systemic, to go to the gym if I'm stuck with an emotion. We try to fix things, and it isn't in any way that's not right. It's just that sometimes those kinds of actions can arise out of a quality of mind and heart that makes the actions themselves not so wholesome. If they're driven by qualities of greed or qualities of hatred and aversion or qualities of just ignorance that kind of contaminate, if you will, our action, our speech, and our action. And so the Buddha actually had this really radical teaching about how to be with these difficulties. And it often just doesn't quite make sense on the surface. I want to read to you one of the suttas. There are many, many teachings, many suttas about how to work with these difficulties. I'll be exploring just one of them tonight. So the Buddha talked about having insight into how things work and cultivating a capacity for wise response. And he's talking to the monks. He says, concentration, monks, has a supporting condition. And the supporting condition is happiness. If we're happy, we can concentrate better. And then he says, happiness has a supporting condition. And that supporting condition is tranquility. If we're tranquil, if we're at ease, we're happy, we can concentrate better. Tranquility, monks, also has a supporting condition. Rapture also has a supporting condition. Joy, monks, also has a supporting condition. Faith, monks, also has a supporting condition. Each of these conditions, supports what comes after it. Faith, monks, also has a supporting condition. Suffering. What? What? We've talked about that a little bit through the series, that suffering actually, and it really, we read, and this is one of those cases where we read the Buddhist the Buddha's teaching, and we think, surely this is a mistranslation, this can't be right. Suffering is a supporting condition for faith, which is a supporting condition for joy, which is a supporting condition for rapture and tranquility. It's like it doesn't on the surface make any sense. And it's why on the night of his enlightenment, he thought, I'm not going to teach, nobody's going to get this. It's just too confusing, it's too hard to understand. So we're really engaged in a fairly challenging and difficult practice. So the Buddha is teaching us that our ordinary understandings of tranquility and happiness and ease, they don't work. Because we try to get rid of dukkha or of suffering. We try to get rid of suffering. We try to get rid of stress. We try to fix it or change it or make somebody wrong. And that, he says, ultimately all of those will fail because of the way life is on this planet. There is stress, there is impermanence, and there are infinite causes and conditions over which we have very little control. Ajahn Sucitto says, so the state of mind we experience isn't dependent on external conditions. So when he talks about faith and suffering being the condition for faith, he's saying when we learn how to be with our stress wisely, it gives us a quality of faith that no matter what happens, I can do this. And I can do this without it destroying my happiness. So we cultivate over and over and over. This isn't a one-shot deal. We cultivate over and over practices and skills at being with difficulty in a wise way that could possibly give us that kind of freedom. So again, Ajahn Sucitto says, so the state of mind we experience isn't dependent on external conditions. A compassionate mind, a heart of warmth and strength, can arise in miserable circumstances when we have found that inner balance. It turns our world around. And Jack Kornfield, I think I said this in one of the earlier talks, whenever we are stuck, Jack says, it is because we have not looked deeply enough into the nature of our experience. And so the practice that we do when we sit in meditation, it's about cultivating a capacity to be with our experience as it is, and ultimately to cultivate the capacity to look deeply enough into it that we can see where deeper happiness is. So when all those difficult things happen in our lives, when I'm ignored, criticized, blamed, when difficult things happen in my family, when there's mental illness, when there's substance abuse, when there's conflict at work, when there's conflict in the family, when there's difficult things on the news, or just simply when the pleasant ends, which it always does, how do I be with this? And so we work with the kind of overwhelm, confusion, exhaustion. Did I mention confusion? That comes up, and there's signs of that. We get disorganized. We get caught in what's called proliferating thought. That kind of, those kinds of cycles of thinking. Those, what I call my and furthermore speech. Where I'm going for a walk and I've spent the entire walk talking to somebody else, saying and furthermore. This is why I'm right and you're wrong. That those kinds of ruminations in our minds, we get disorganized, we get confused. We can become somewhat inarticulate verbally. We don't really quite know what to say. We can have floods of emotion, disorganized thinking, be impulsive in our responses to things. Become rigid in our responses to things. It has to be this way and only this way. And we can resort to things like excessive alcohol or food intake, or my personal favorite would be irritability, or sleep disturbances, that thing that happens at 2:30 in the morning when you wake up trying to solve whatever the problem is. So those are all signs that our system has gotten a little wonky, and that we're looking for a way to find more ease with a circumstance, with something in which there really isn't ease. So if we don't understand all of these things as a doorway to deeper insight, we could imagine, or if we don't understand them as a normal part of our human life, we could imagine that there's something wrong. There's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with you, or there's something wrong with our politicians or the world, or that there's something wrong. And if only that were fixed, then I would have happiness, tranquility, joy, and ease. But in the meantime, it's out of my control. And the Buddha is saying it's not out of our control. It's just that we have to approach it in a way that on the surface doesn't quite make sense. And it's not because we're sadistic and trying to have things be unpleasant. It's just how things work on this planet. I talked, I don't know, last week I guess it was, about my game of Stump the Flower Person, if you were here. And there's this is a life of that the Buddha offers us of stump the human person. How do I find freedom with this? With this. So, Ajahn Sumedho says, if we haven't cried deeply, and I might add, if we haven't laughed deeply, in the course of our meditation practice, that we're probably not settling into it quite fully enough. That when we begin to let go of our ordinary way of thinking, there's a tremendous release, and sometimes it's accompanied by tears and or laughter, emotion. And if we don't understand that as normal and expected, we can become quite distressed. Then the mind can start proliferating about that. Why am I crying so deeply, or why am I, what is this release that's happening? And then we can become, distressed about that. So that's all I wanted to say about it. As if you wanted to kind of hear more of the introduction, there are a few talks. I realized I didn't label them terribly sequentially, but it's the last few talks that I've offered through IMCC that sort of lead up to this. And I just wanted to offer a guided meditation to help us understand, okay, I'm here at this doorway. I'm here at this difficult experience, whatever it is. And you might, maybe through the break, if you want to, kind of consider what you might want to inquire into, to maybe bring into your awareness some circumstance that has some charge to it. Maybe some circumstance in your family, some relationship that is mildly to modestly annoying or challenging in some way. Please, 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 please. Can I underline this? Can I put stars around it? Can I put circles around it? Can I put lights pointing to it? Please do not take the most traumatic, the most difficult thing you can think of. That would be like saying, okay, we're going to learn how to mountain climb, and let's start with Mount Everest. Okay, it's not bad. A lot of people do it fine. So I'm sure you can too. Okay? So to not take the most difficult thing while you're kind of understanding, how does this work? Okay? Because what will tend to happen if you take the most difficult thing, just as what would happen if I decided to tackle Mount Everest tomorrow, is I would very quickly get overwhelmed. I'd very quickly get overwhelmed. And then I would go, oh, just look at what a poor athlete I am, not to mention the fact that I'm endangering my little Sherpa. Um, so it just, but see if you can bring into your awareness some situation. Again, it might be very personal, um, or in terms of a personal relationship. We've been talking about challenges in relationship as doorways. It might be something at work. It might be something in the news. I can think of a couple people in the news who give me some pause, where where abandoning greed, hatred, and delusion um, are for me personally quite challenging. So just again, something that isn't Mount Everest, but that is enough that you can, you're just curious, how might I work with this in a way that could possibly lead to a little bit more freedom from suffering? Okay? So we'll do that. It's 20 after 7 now. Let's just take a short little break of just maybe 5 minutes or so. I'll ring the bell. We'll come back. And then what I'll do is I'm going to divide the guided practice into 4 sections, and I'm going to pause at the end of each section so that if you have questions or you go, this doesn't make any sense to me, I don't get it, I don't understand how it works, you have a chance to ask that. Okay? All right, so let's just take a few minutes right now. So once again, suffering, the Buddha says, is a supporting condition for the cultivation of faith, that we learn we can do this. My happiness is not dependent on things working out the way I want them to. Faith is a supporting condition for joy in all circumstances, even when things are unpleasant. Really? Buddha says, yeah, really. So it's not the way we usually think about things. So the acronym for what we're doing is RAIN, RAIN, and this will be recorded, so you don't have to write any of this down. We're fine. And so I'll walk you through each of the parts of it through a guided meditation, and then summarize it at the end. So it's a practice that is taught to work with some difficulty, work with these doorways, these difficulties as doorways to freedom, greater freedom from suffering. So let's sit with it a little bit. We'll do the first part. I'll ring the bell, and then there'll be an opportunity if there are difficulties or questions that you have. So we start this practice as we begin any meditation, is simply coming into presence. Arriving here, letting go of whatever has been in the past and whatever might be in the future. Feeling this body sitting. And just relaxing into the sitting. Here we are. Just look to see if there's any tension in the body that could easily be released. And if there's any capacity to appreciate any ease that you notice, any goodness in simply sitting. Any goodness in simply hearing. Simply resting here. So the first part of working with difficulty is to simply recognize it. Simply know its presence. But knowing it in a particular way, we tend to focus on difficulty externally, thinking, if you will, about what's going on out there, what might be different, what should be different, what must be different. And we tend to focus conceptually, even if we do move into our own experience, we tend to kind of keep the experience in the mode of thinking about it. And so recognition involves bringing awareness to what is the experience like to be with this difficulty. How is it known in the body? How is it known in the body? When I do this, sometimes it really becomes so clear to me how much I don't want to feel in my body what it's like internally to have this difficulty. How does your body register this difficulty for you right now? Begin to pay attention inwardly, inside the body. If it's grief or sadness, where is it in the body? Is it in the heart? If there's annoyance or difficulty, irritation, is it in the heart? Is it in the belly? Is it in the elbow, the jaw? How does the body register this difficulty? If you bring the circumstance to mind, maybe you could picture the circumstance or the person, or if it's simply an emotion that you're experiencing, to look inside the body. How is it known? We're letting go of stories. We're letting go of ideas about it. Allowing ourselves to simply know the felt sense in the body. This is what it's like for me. Can you know how the body knows this experience? A couple of things might be happening that sometimes present some difficulty. Sometimes when we invite people to know the experience inside the body, it's really hard to connect with the body. It's almost like I don't have one. I have a head, but I don't have a body. If that's the case, let that be the difficult experience. We know you have a body, right? So then the difficult experience might be, what's it like inside your body to not feel your body? Is it blank? Is it dark? Is it empty? What do you notice? Another way that this might be challenging is that sometimes the feeling quality seems kind of overwhelming. It's big. So the invitation is to not go inside the feeling. See if you can kind of play with that a little bit and see what that means to you. If you are aware of the experience in the body, but you don't go inside of it, you step back, you see it, you know that it's there. You know that, for example, there might be some rumbling in your belly or some tightness in your arm. But you're not going inside the tightness. You're simply knowing it. You're seeing that it's there. You could even imagine yourself stepping back from it and seeing it. Another thing that sometimes happens when we start to do this practice is that there's not just one emotion, there are 47 of them. It's, I think of it like a classroom of young children where the teacher's been away for a long time and the teacher comes back with some attention and all of the children start to rush him at once, wanting attention. So we can't do that. We couldn't do that if we were the teacher, and we can't do that with our own emotions, our own experience either. So we have to sort of invite some of those feelings to step aside and to focus on one in particular. How is this known in the body? See if you can get a sense of what all of the problem, all of the difficulty, all of the challenging thing, of what it feels like. And it doesn't have to have a word. It might have a shape or a color or a texture. What's the felt sense of this experience in the body? It may not be altogether clear. That's fine too. Let it be what it is. Sometimes if there are lots of parts of it, rather than trying to kind of select one out, you can kind of clump them all together. And what is it like to have the experience of this whole mush of things together? What's that like? Finding it in the body. If it changes and moves, that's fine. Just watch it do that. If it doesn't change and move, that's fine. Just watch it do that. Simply knowing your own experience in the body, letting go of concepts. And then looking to see if there's some kind of sense of all of that. There might be a word, which is actually moving back toward the idea of a concept, but there might be a word that is like, okay, it's heavy, or it's um, dull. But there might not be. It might be more like an image, or just a sense in the body that doesn't have any language attached. Again, often when I do this practice myself, I notice how much the mind wants to stay in charge and how much I'm reluctant to feel into the body's experience, direct experience. Can kind of notice the ways that the mind tries to rescue me, if you will, from having to feel something unpleasant or challenging. Okay, I'm going to ring the bell in just a minute and just have a moment where if there are questions about this piece of it, an opportunity for people to raise those raise those questions. I know there often are. So let's see if there are here. So the invitation of our practice is to know the experience, whatever it is, to know experience directly, whatever it is. And so here we are inquiring into how we might do that with something that is unpleasant or challenging. Are there questions that came up, wonderings about things that I said, or maybe how it worked for you, that it didn't work quite? Anybody want to raise a question?
When you notice it's in your body where it is, mine didn't seem to linger when I noticed where it was in my body. And then I have this other part of my body that reminds me, like it always wants to get my attention. So anyway, it was just, I'm just curious about that when you're doing this brains. Like, do you, even if it like, it's not there for that long, do you just still kind of stay with it and see if it goes somewhere else? Mm-hmm. Or what do you do?
Well, it sounds like, Sue, that you're really kind of working with it nicely. One of the things that you notice, and we talk about impermanence in our practice, and so one of the things that you notice is sometimes an experience that seems so solid in my mind actually isn't so solid when I just simply look at the experience. The experience is there, and then with some attention, it just shifts and moves and changes. Fine, it can just shift and move and change, and then you bring attention to whatever makes sense to bring attention to. It might be something else. It might be something, you might just simply drop back to your breath and say, oh, okay, fine. For the purposes of this practice, if it's interesting to you or you're curious, then you might maybe find something else or look to see this other place that seems to be coming up. It's like, okay, what's this? If that's interesting to you. But it isn't like, indeed, one of the things that we notice is that the thing that seems so solid in my mind, there's this circumstance with my coworker, and there's this, thing that seems so solid. When I actually pay direct attention to my experience of discomfort, it's maybe not such a big deal. Is that okay? Yeah. There's impermanence. You just had a direct experience of impermanence. You don't have to make feelings go away. They shift and change. Sooner or later, and sometimes, as some of us notice, they don't like shift and change sooner sometimes. Yeah, Cecilia?
So your comment just there about shift and change made me think about the situation. If you have a situation, though, that you think you're trying to let it go, and in some ways, are you maybe trying not to deal with it? And then by looking at it, you're saying, well, sometimes I find now I have to deal with this because if I'm trying to avoid a conflict.
Yeah. We'll hopefully touch into that in the second part, and so ask the question again if it doesn't answer your question. But yes, there's a difference between letting it go, letting something go, and trying to let something go. And I think that's what you're pointing to, that we can have an experience. And I said to somebody this morning, I have this experience and I know it's wrong. And the person said, excuse me, pardon me, that's incorrect. Um, so that there's this, I have this experience and I don't want it. So let me try to get rid of it. Let me do something that gets rid of it. Now, if I do something that, quote, gets rid of it, if I am like kind of cranky, and the reason I'm cranky is that I haven't eaten in 3 days, and I say, oh, I haven't eaten in 3 days, or I need a nap, and I take a nap, and it's like, oh, okay, well, that helped, that's fine. That's fine. But if it's clearly not about something that can obviously and easily be remedied. So if I read the newspaper and I, quote, try to let go of some of my reactions, it doesn't work.
I think, though, for most of it, it's like, well, there's real people, not just the news people, but the people in your life, and you're often wrestling with, do you say something? Do you not say something? Is it helpful to say something?
Exactly.
Or will I then look back and say, I should have said, I should have said something at that time.
Right. And so here the invitation is to pause a bit directly into the experience itself, because, the Buddha says that suffering is a condition for the development of faith. We discover that if we allow ourselves to be with the experience, what is needed reveals itself. So Sue says, okay, I'm with this experience, and what is needed in this moment is nothing. But if I'm actually with the direct experience, what is needed will reveal. Do I need to speak? Do I not need to speak? But the difference is, the practice is that if I do see a need to speak, that the speech isn't driven by my desperation to get rid of this unpleasant feeling. I want to get rid of this unpleasant feeling by giving it to you, which is what we sometimes try to do. Or if you only would do X, I wouldn't have any unpleasant feelings. That's not true. Okay. And so we'll work with that in the next piece. Any other questions about that? We good? Yeah, Patsy. Well, here, hold on a second, Patsy.
So I felt like, okay, feeling into this, I'm breathing faster. I can feel my arm muscles tensing up, my biceps. I don't know why, with this anxiety. And then I was like, okay, I've identified this feeling. Now, must I sit with it? And I'm not sure whether we were just going on about it because it was a lesson and you really wanted everybody to recognize it, or is there some value in just sort of staying there and feeling anxiety, fast breathing, clenched muscles?
There are a number of different responses that I could give to that, Patsy. There is no must. There is only if I'm working with my anxiety and the things that I ordinarily do don't seem to help. I take a nap and it doesn't seem to help. Then it might be interesting to me to inquire into what is this and what is needed. Now, having said that, sometimes we can be with an experience, and going back to when I was talking about Mount Everest, we can be with an experience and we can say, I don't have the energy or the desire to work with this right now, or the time maybe. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to go watch TV or pick flowers in the garden or something. I'm going to go do something else because I don't have the energy to do this. Or it's too big. I need somebody to help me break it into small enough pieces, because if I come near this energy, it's so overwhelming that then different metaphor, then I kind of go into Niagara Falls. I'm going over the falls, and I don't have the capacity to be aware of it. So there's no must about it. There is cultivating the capacity to be with the difficult in a way that can possibly open into new insights and new freedom. So it's a practice if we're curious and want to explore that. Let's move to the second part, because that's sort of a couple of the questions really move us in that direction. Because the second part is accept, allow the experience to be there. So we'll don't do anything with it yet. We'll just come back. So if it's still available to you, come back to that experience. There might be something new or different, or you might decide, I don't want to do this anymore. Fine, don't. But if you're interested and you're curious, how would I work with this? Either the same experience or perhaps a different one. Find the felt sense in the body. See if you can notice how the body knows that you have this difficulty. I have a relative that I sometimes have some difficulty with. All I need to do is think of them, and I can feel that. I can feel it in my body. There's tightness in my throat, a little congestion in my chest. That's how it is. So at the moment, if I were to be with that person, it would be with tightness in my throat and congestion in my chest, not fully present. So if I want to inquire into how could I be with this person being a bit more present. So here's this experience. You find this experience in the body. The A of rain is to allow it to be there. And a couple of you were pointing to the tricky ways the mind has of working with that. Sometimes when we consider allowing it, it's sort of like, okay, I'll give you permission to be there if you will go away. That's not quite what's meant. Look to see, would you be willing to give this feeling in your body, not the external circumstance, the feeling about it in your body, your permission to be there? Even if permission means a hair of space. Little teeny tiny space. We don't need football fields of permission. Look to see, would you be willing to give this experience that you have in your body your permission to be there? No, we don't know what's going to happen next. So we're not bargaining with it. Here's the faith part, huh? Cultivate faith that I could be with this experience and there's something useful that could happen. Presumably the Buddha is not just being sadistic and trying to help us be more tortured. A possible answer to that question, see what's really true. A possible answer, when I say, would you be willing to give that feeling your permission? A possible answer is no. If the answer is no, I can't, I won't, I don't want to, whatever, don't matter, then just shift, if you're still curious about it, just shift your attention to the no as the difficult experience. Would you be willing to give the no your permission? And so you're just shifting to that as the inquiry. So right now, can it be okay just to have this feeling, just as it is in the body right now? Awake to it, aware of it, kind, uncritical, letting go of judgment, letting go of criticism, letting go of theories that if I were a better person, it would be different. Would you be willing to just be with the feeling? So a radical kind of presence with ourselves and with our own experience. Sometimes if we have energy for it, and you can look and see if you do, we can experiment with how much permission the feeling wants and or how much permission we're willing to give it, like almost like how much room. It could be as tiny as a hair, one of the hairs on my head. It could be as big as several galaxies. How big does this feeling want to be? How much room does it want? If you have energy for it. If you don't have energy for it, don't do it. Experiment a bit, just inquire. Is it possible to accept that you have this experience right now? Whatever it is. With kindness and with a simple kind of knowing. It's like this now. For me, here, with this. Sometimes this can be the hardest part. We can have so many opinions about how we're supposed to be. And just see what you notice. What's interesting. Okay, in a moment I'm going to ring the bell again and see if there are more questions. One of the things that I notice when I do this practice is how much my thinking mind, the analysis that I do, the stories that I tell, and furthermore speeches are really my mind's efforts to help me not feel something unpleasant. To just not be with this is what it's like for me. Because this practice can be really quite challenging, to be with just my own experience of something difficult. Any questions or observations or disagreements, objections? Yeah, Regina.
So, when I was feeling my feelings, maybe I should give more context. It has something to do with I have to do something tonight that I have procrastinated over. I gave myself a personal deadline and I really don't want to do it. So I have all these feelings about it. And then I notice when I sit there and just focus on the feelings do get better. And as soon as I think of the real thing that the feelings are connected to, there's another wave of intensity. And then then I focus on the feelings again. And it seems that the feelings are actually able to uncouple themselves from the event or from what
Beautiful.
I have to do. And then as soon as the event comes into my mind again, it's another big wave
Yeah.
of stuff. And
Yeah.
so it's just
Yeah.
an observation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're working with it beautifully, and there it's become sort of simply an inquiry. So you notice that it's actually not coupled. It's not the same as the event. But you also notice that there isn't like if the Buddha said, "Hey, look, I'm going to offer this meditation practice. I'm going to offer you a practice, and all you need to do is you need to sit down for 5 minutes, and all your troubles will be gone." That you will just see into the nature of human life, and there will be freedom from suffering, and everything will be fine. He wouldn't have hesitated to teach. We're very strongly conditioned as people, as just human organisms, to turn away from our experience of the unpleasant. To try to find a solution to it, either internally by drugging ourselves or externally by killing somebody else. So that to have a different way of being with the unpleasant, that the experience can continue to be unpleasant, but can I be with the experience of unpleasant? The very first talk I gave, we talked about the second arrow, that second arrow. Can I cultivate the capacity to be with the unpleasant without adding a second arrow to it? And the practice is just an inquiry over and over again. It's like, how does this work for me? Is there a second arrow here? Or is this is an unpleasant experience, or this is an unpleasant thing I need to do? There's nothing that's going to make it pleasant. Cleaning the litter box, there's nothing that's going to make it pleasant. But can I work with my own aversion to it in such a way that I can be with this unpleasant experience in a way that doesn't add the second arrow? Huh? Does that touch your inquiry at all? Or no? Is there more you want to add? Or yeah. One of the things, I was going to say this at the end, I'll say it now. As you know, I've been reading Ajahn Chah quite a lot lately, and so here's this enlightened master who spent his entire lifetime working with these practices, and sometimes the way he describes his own experience of working with the teachings, it's like he's going into battle. with himself. He's going into, like, how does this work? I don't believe this. This doesn't make any sense. How does this work? And looking directly in his own experience to see, do these teachings make sense here with this? So you play with it and experiment with it and look and see. We're not getting rid of the unpleasant. Now, the mind doesn't like that idea. The mind says, no, wait a minute, I want a different planet. So we're not getting rid of the unpleasant, but the Buddha is offering a way of being with the unpleasant that doesn't add a second arrow for myself or for other people. Huh? Okay. Yeah, so play with it a little bit, see what you notice. It's interesting that it uncouples, so you say, okay, how does this work? This uncoupling and then this coupling back together. What's happening here? Is there a thought that's coming up? Is there some way I'm trying to get rid of the unpleasant? It's like, and so then you just look, that's actually the next step, is investigating to look and see what's happening here. Okay? Others? Other? With accept, allow? Huh? Am I the only one who has difficulty with this part? Okay, well let's go to the third part. So the third, the acronym RAIN, again, the third part is I, and it's investigating. So with Regina, we were just kind of beginning to explore that, and I think maybe with Patsy also, just sort of inquiring, okay, so what's happening here? Or Sue's question, it's going away. Is that it? Is that all there is? Is there more that's needed? What's happening here? So we stabilize our awareness, but looking directly at our own experience with the ultimate goal of knowing what's needed. Somebody was asking, Cecilia, I think, was asking the question about, how do we know what to do? Well, we know what to do by knowing the experience intimately and understanding what is needed here. So the third aspect of the practice is investigation, looking to see a little bit more deeply into the nature of the experience itself. And here, it isn't so much thinking about it as just sort of examining the experience in the body, knowing perhaps a little bit more deeply. Is there? We do this in our meditation practice sometimes. Is there movement in the experience? So go back to it and look and see. Just look and see what's happening. If you're interested. If you're not interested, then you don't have to do it, of course. You can leave it, let it be conceptual. But if you're interested in kind of exploring it, it's actually quite different to explore it directly in experience than to just understand it conceptually. So does the experience move and change? Look and see. If you know it in the body and accept it, does it move and change? If so, what's that like? Is that pleasant, unpleasant, neutral? What do you notice? Does it get bigger, heavier, more dense? Does the mind get involved? Are there lots of thoughts about it? Opinions about yourself, about other people, about what needs to happen next? Are there fears that maybe if you stay with the experience, it won't go away or you won't know what to do? Can you allow yourself to simply know what's going on in here without elaborating or criticizing or judging? With kindness, patience, curiosity. Is this feeling under my control? Or does it kind of have a life of its own? If it's not under my control, is it possible to let go of trying to control it? Maybe, maybe not. Look to see what's true. Am I hanging on to some aspect of it? Am I resisting some aspect of it? And does that hanging on or resisting, does it lead to ease or happiness? Does it lead to more suffering? That's not a rhetorical question. Look and see. Is there any way of being with this feeling that doesn't add a second arrow? Simply allowing it to be there. Where is ease? Where is more suffering? Look to see what's true. And by ease, I don't mean ease like, okay, everything is fine with the world. Everything is now pleasant. I mean ease in that the second arrow gets released and I have a bit more capacity to be with this unpleasantness than I did before. That would be ease. If there isn't more ease, then notice that. What's happening? What's interesting? Is there judgment? Is there criticism? Is there contraction around it? Is there some kind of insistence about it or opinion about it? What do you notice? Okay, I'll ring the bell in just a minute. And we can talk about what's interesting as you investigate your own experience here. So remember, the whole point of our practice, of our meditation practice, isn't to get to be really good at sitting still. It's cultivating a capacity to be with our experience in such a way that there is less suffering. Freedom from suffering. The Buddha says, I'm teaching how to be with these difficulties in life in a way that leads to less suffering. So the investigation part of it is, where is more suffering? Where is less suffering? How is this working? What's going on here? Questions, comments, puzzlements?
This last round brought together two different kind of insights. The first was how going towards a difficult emotion as opposed to being averse and running away allows you to see the decay of any emotion as you attend to it over time.
Mm-hmm.
The only problem in my case for this particular emotion is that the next time I do it, the same thing happens. But that's when the second insight came, which is this is a universal human emotion, and it's not about me,
Beautiful.
or it isn't just about me. This is a universal human emotion that I share with
Beautiful.
probably with everyone. And that both being able to practice seeing impermanence and then seeing kind of the not self and universality of some of our emotional life was was a blessing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yes, that's actually the N of rain. You know, that this isn't really about me. This, you know, that an aspect of being human is arising in me. You know, the unpleasant happens. There is anger, there is irritation, there's jealousy, there's grief, there's sadness, there's anxiety. It's not personal. It's not personal. And it's not the fault of my relative. Now, my relative might be doing something that's really quite unskillful, but my experience of it is an aspect of being human. Beautiful, yeah. So that's the N. Thank you. I don't have to teach that. You just did. Yeah. Not self, non-identification. Just non-identification, not taking it personally. That what's happening, the unpleasant externally and the unpleasant internally, it's not personal. You know, we sort of tend to want to make it about me somehow. Yeah. So non-identification. Others? Other thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I noticed that my second arrow is always that there's something wrong with me, but I'm so used to seeing it that at this point I can kind of catch it. And also that, like he observed that it's human to be flawed, but it's not necessarily bad.
Yeah.
So kind of resting in the brokenness and being flawed, and it's like,
Beautiful.
yeah,
Beautiful.
it is what it is.
Yeah, there's a Zen teacher who says, all of you is perfect. And some parts of you could use improvement. But yeah, beautiful, yeah. And then when we get to that place where we really touch into it, and it sounds like you're really right there, what happens, you may notice, is that our hearts start to break a little bit. You know, where there's a difference between having a sense there's something wrong with me and the kind of tender, if you will, brokenheartedness of holding this being and my relatives ultimately maybe in the same care. Yeah. Wow. Awesome. So then we see, oh, that's the practice. I see the habitual pattern of quickly moving to there's something wrong with me. Or alternately, there's something wrong with somebody else. Yeah. Beautiful. There's a lot there, isn't there? Yeah. A lot there to work with. Others who's...
I just wanted to thank you very briefly for the investigation. It was very effective for me, and I especially
Beautiful.
liked your ongoing checklist to find out about this. And was it this way or was it that way? Is it? I kind of need that checklist in my head to satisfy my left brain, otherwise I'll stop
Yes.
investigating. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah. Good, you're welcome. And actually, we can thank the Buddha for his willingness on that night to say, this is difficult, and I'll still teach it. Yeah. That we can be with the difficult. And again, it's, our whole practice is, a zillion different ways of being with it. This is one way. There are, lots of different nuances to it, but great. So the investigation of really kind of looking to see what's true here for me. What's true. Yeah, great. Anything else, others? So again, the N is just simply not taking it all personally. This isn't about me. An aspect of being human, this stump the human person, what I talked about last week. This an aspect of the life on this planet, stump the human person. How does this work? An aspect of life, which is very confusing, is arising for me. And it takes a while sometimes to unwind our conditioning. Again, one of the just wonderful ththings about Ajahn Chah is he really talks so openly about how much he had to kind of work with himself. Sometimes, I think I said, sometimes it's almost like he's talking about warfare, of just working with himself, where his determination and his faith in the practice were so strong that he just kept working. It's like, okay, an aspect of being human is arising in me. How do I be with this in a way that doesn't cultivate more suffering for myself and others? That's it. That's the inquiry. The Buddha makes no moral judgment here. He does not tell us not to be this way or to cut it out. In fact, he doesn't even say we are that way. He just says that there are these energies at work. Remember, the First Noble Truth points to the suffering that arises from trying to encompass existence in terms of myself. The First Noble Truth points to the suffering that arises when we try to encompass existence in terms of myself. As soon as we start saying we are this way and we should be another way, self-desire has slipped into our mind and has pushed us out of balance. So the language of the Buddha's teaching is deliberately impersonal. This way we don't get ashamed or defensive, and we are encouraged to calm our heart, to steady it and slow its movements. The calming takes the edge off the thirst of clinging and desire, and is one of the essential aims of meditation. Based on that, we have a greater possibility to investigate the way things are in a more open and objective light. However, if we cultivate attention to what is arising in the present, in whatever form the present moment takes, our mind begins to reveal its own buried treasures: sensitivity, confidence, and serenity. In other words, we establish a thirst-free relationship to the senses, and that gives us both poise and understanding. So I want to close with just a couple of comments here. One is, don't underestimate the power of what you have just done. Even if you think, I did it, I touched it a little bit, it really didn't mean very much, I didn't get very much out of it. let yourself just be open to the possibility that just touching our experience that much shifts it. And that you may find yourself at 2:30 tomorrow morning, or when you're taking the trash out tomorrow afternoon or washing the dishes, all of a sudden having a new insight into how to be with us. So it's really pretty profound sometimes. And again, that's how faith is cultivated, by being able to be with stress and difficulty. And we cultivate faith that I can do this and it's useful. So for one thing, be gentle with yourselves and don't underestimate how powerful the practice can be. And sometimes the insights come in really peculiar ways, like you're watching the news tomorrow night and a commercial comes on and explains to you the meaning of life. Seriously, I'm serious. I'm serious, you know. So it sometimes can come in quite unusual ways. So just, be open to that possibility. And then this is Ajahn Chah. He talks about this kind of fierce practice that he did, and then he goes to this. He says, when we begin to wield the peace and serenity we've been developing in meditation to contemplate these things, wisdom arises. It's not something fabricated and constructed. It just comes. Wisdom arises. Insight has to proceed from peace and tranquility. The entire process will happen naturally of its own accord. We can't force it. And then I love this part. He says, the Buddha taught that this process matures at its own rate. Having reached this level of practice, we allow it to develop according to our innate capabilities, spiritual aptitude, and the merit we've accumulated in the past. Whether the progress is swift or slow is out of our control. It's just like planting a tree. The tree knows how fast it should grow. If we want it to grow more quickly than it is, this is pure delusion. If we want it to grow more slowly, recognize this as delusion as well. If we do the work, the results will be forthcoming, just like planting a tree. For example, he says, say we want to plant a chili bush. Our responsibility is to dig a hole, plant the seedling, water it, fertilize it, and protect it from insects. This is our job, our end of the bargain. This is where faith comes in. Whether the chili plant grows or not is up to it. It's not our business. We can't go tugging on the plant, trying to stretch it and make it grow faster. That's not how nature works. Our responsibility is to water and fertilize it. Practicing Dhamma in the same way puts our hearts at ease. And so we develop the faith of the chili bush farmer. We do the practice, we explore. And we aim for the sure heart's release that the Buddha offered us, but we aim by just simply doing what could possibly be useful and letting go of what isn't so helpful. And this is Victor Bird, and this speaks to something we were speaking of earlier. He says, when we embrace the truth of suffering, just human suffering, life on this planet, go back to the first talk, the stress of human life. When we embrace the truth of suffering, something profound happens. There is an opening, a tiny fracture in our hearts. It may be imperceptible at first, but as our practice deepens, the heart is transformed. As the heart is transformed, a life is transformed. The natural state of a heart that is tender and cracked open is love. And that's the Buddha's teachings. And there we are. The end of tonight. So blessings. There will be one more talk that I will offer in this sequence in 2 weeks. And this meditation is, I have a blog. It's sharonbb.org. Under guided meditations, there are 2 versions of this meditation. If you're interested in looking at it further, we've also, as always, recorded tonight. That will be available. Judy will post those as well. And then there'll be sort of a final talk that I realized today I didn't talk about how wonderful relationships can be. We should probably do that. So there'll be a final talk in a couple of weeks. So blessings.